Masechet Nazir Daf Yod Zayin. We're in the middle of a machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish about someone who is in a cemetery, and while he's in the cemetery says, I am a Nazir. Does the Nazirut take effect or not? Rabbi Yochanan says it does, and therefore he is prohibited from drinking wine and cutting his hair. Whereas Resh Lakish says it does not take effect. While he's in the cemetery, he has to leave the cemetery and then say, all right, now I'm ready to take upon my Nazirut. But until he says something, he is not yet a Nazir, and so he can drink wine. So that's our understanding of the machloket right now. We already challenged Resh Lakish from two sources, and we're continuing that line of questioning from Rabbi Yochanan against the Resh Lakish, and now we're going to see four more challenges. We'll have six altogether. I like to have seven, is often found that there are seven challenges, but in this case, I only see six of them. Okay, anyway, itibe and ben tamesh nazar nazir tahor shenitma. There is no difference between someone who is tameh, we'll assume tameh lamet, who became a nazir, to someone who was a regular Nazir who was tahor and became tameh. They're going to have the same consequences. Ela shetameh shenazar shvi'i shelo ole lo leminyan, veNazir tahor shenitma en shvi'i shelo ole lo min haminyan. So this baraita says the only difference between them is that someone who was already tameh when he declared himself to be a Nazir, well, of course, his counting is not going to start until he's tahor, and since he's tameh met, he's going to sprinkle himself on the third and seventh day, go to the mikveh on the seventh day, and then he can begin immediately. That seventh day can already start counting as day number one. Whereas a regular Nazir who was tahor and became tameh, that's a problem. He can't start counting on the seventh day because he has to bring korbanot on his eighth day. That's a special rule of a Nazir who became tameh. He has to wait the 7 days for anyone who becomes tahor from tumat met. On the seventh day, he shaves his hair. On the eighth day, he brings korbanot. Only on the eighth day can he start counting. Okay, so that's the braita. Here's the proof. If Resh Lakish, you say that the Nazirut does not automatically take effect. In other words, according to Rabbi Yochanan, he is a Nazir even while he's in the cemetery, and it's hovering and waiting. That was the language we used yesterday. And as soon as he leaves the cemetery, becomes tahor, then automatically the Nazirut rests on him and he can start counting when he's tahor. So that's why on the seventh day, automatically the count starts. But according to you, Resh Lakish, you said that the Nazirut is in abeyance. It's paused because it never takes effect. Not even paused. It actually never takes effect until he says, all right, now I'm ready to take upon myself Nazirut. It's not automatically when he leaves or even when he becomes tahor, only when he says so. So why should the seventh day automatically count? Right from here, this baraita sounds like the seventh. That's the only difference between them, whether the seventh day automatically starts or he has to wait till the eighth day. But according to you, Resh Lakish, that's not the main. The main difference is that if he is declared himself a Nazir while tameh, then he has to explicitly say, I am ready to now begin my Nazirut that never even started yet. Okay, so therefore, this is a big challenge to Resh Lakish, or at least our understanding of Resh Lakish, and because of that, now we're going to reframe the whole machloket. Amar mor bar Rav Asher, mechal kule amala peligi de hayla, ela ki peligi le milke. So, Amor bar Rav Asher explains, actually, everyone agrees, Resh Lakish also, that the Nazirut does apply, even while he's in the cemetery. He says, had any Nazir, he does become a Nazir, and he's prohibited from drinking wine and cutting his hair. Rather, the machloket is about whether he deserves lashes should he drink wine and cut his hair. Rabbi Yochanan sabar kevan dechayla lake, Resh Lakish sabar la lake vechayla. Rabbi Yochanan says, since it applies, he even would get lashes. Whereas Resh Lakish says no, he does not get lashes, but it does take effect, right? There are many cases where something's of a lesser degree prohibition, and so it's prohibited, but you don't get a punishment for it. But in fact, he would be a Nazir at that time automatically, and that would explain this, the Braita here, why the counting starts immediately, automatically on the seventh day for Resh Lakish also, because he is called a Nazir. He doesn't have to say anything again. All right, good. Now, based on this new understanding of the Machloket, Rabbi Yochanan is going to ask further questions to Resh Lakish. The first one from our very Mishnah, even though we asked about it already on the previous stuff. Now we have to bring it up again because it's different in this new understanding of Resh Lakish. Misha Nazar vehu bebet hakebarot. Afilu haya sham 30 yom en olin lo min haminyan ve'eno mevi korban tum'ah. Our Mishnah taught that someone is who was in a cemetery and said, "I'm going to be a Nazir. I am a Nazir." And even if he stays there for 30 days, we don't count any of those days towards his 30. And furthermore, he does not have to bring a korban on becoming tameh. Only if he was tahor and he becomes tameh, then that cancels out all the days that he had before, and he has to bring a korban. But here, because he never got even up to day one, that gets counted and start because he's in the cemetery the whole time, he does not bring a korban. Now, Resh Lakish makes an inference. Korban tumahu de la maiteha milka lake ale. The Mishnah only says that he doesn't have to bring a korban. The inference from that is that, but other consequences would apply, and he would get lashes if he drank wine. Otherwise, the Mishnah should have said that he doesn't bring korban and he doesn't get lashes. So you see from there that he should get lashes. That's what I say, Rabbi Yochanan says. Bedin hu delitne eno loke. But Resh Lakish can answer, you're right. Really, the Mishnah should have said that he doesn't bring korban and he also doesn't get lashes. Ela mishum dekaba elimit sefa yasav nichnas ole lo min haminyan umebi korban tum'ah tanya resha eno mebi korban tum'ah. Resh Lakish explains the reason why the Mishnah left out lashes at the beginning, that he doesn't get lashes, is because it wanted to make parallel the sefa. That case is where he goes out, he leaves the cemetery and comes back in later, where he would start counting his days because he left, and if he then is tahor and goes back in, he does have to bring a korban for tum'ah. So I wanted to contrast the resha and the sefa. Resha, no korban. In the sefa, yes, he brings a korban. So that's why it says in the resha that he does not bring a korban tum'ah. And it does not talk about lashes because lashes is not the subject matter of this Mishnah. Mishnah wanted to point out a contrast between bringing a korban or not bringing a korban if you were tameh the whole time or if you become tameh. In fact, there would be a difference regarding lashes, according to Resh Lakish, that someone who was in the cemetery the whole time and drank wine would not get lashes, whereas if he left the cemetery, became tahor, and then drank wine, certainly he would get lashes because then his tumah fully starts. But that's not the point of the Mishnah. It just wants to bring a parallelism and not bring every single consequence. Okay, by the way, you see that Rabbi Yochanan asked Resh Lakish a question. This is the second version of it, according to the new understanding of Mor Bar Rav Ashi, who was a very late Amorah. So the question is, which question did Rabbi Yochanan actually ask Resh Lakish? The version on the previous daf or the version here? Right? Rabbi Yochanan himself only could have asked one of them. Now, what you can see from here is that the Gemara doesn't necessarily have a tradition about what exactly Rabbi Yochanan asked Resh Lakish, but rather, as happens often, it's the later Gemara that is saying Rabbi Yochanan could challenge Resh Lakish based on this Mishnah, right? Or we even have a tradition Rabbi Yochanan did challenge him, but we may not have a tradition on the exact language of that Rabbi Yochanan used, or even that he actually did, right? These are questions that are said for him, and sometimes the Gemara will use language like that, right? Rabbi Yochanan could say. So even when it says Rabbi Yochanan did tell Resh Lakish, the point is that this is an argument that Resh Lakish could have, maybe did have, doesn't matter if he actually did or not, but that he would challenge Resh Lakish and Resh Lakish would have an answer. Okay, so that was number 4. This is now the 5th challenge. Tashema en ben tameh shenazar nazir tahor shenitma. We also already had this baraita, that there's no difference between a Nazir who was tameh lamet, who became a Nazir, to someone who was tahor and became tameh, אלא שטמא שנזר שביעי שלו עולה לו מן המניין, ונזיר טהור שנטמא אין שביעי שלו עולה לו מן המניין. As we just read this in the beginning of this daf, that someone who was tameh and became a Nazir, he has to wait 7 days because he's tameh, but the 7th day, since he doesn't have to bring korbanot, it's just becoming tahor from tumat met. So the 7th day, once he goes to the mikveh, he can count that as day number 1 for the Nazirut. Whereas a Nazir who was tahor, who became tameh, he has to bring korbanot on the 8th day. So he cannot start recounting until the 8th day. That's the end of the Braita. Hala malkot ze vazeh shavin. So we can infer from this that the only difference between them is when you start counting, but they would be the same in all other regards, including regarding lashes, that both of them would get lashes, right? Certainly someone who was tahor and drank wine while he was tahor, independent of whether he became tameh afterwards or not, he would get lashes. Even while he's tameh, he would get lashes, because he already started his nizirut, certainly that, and now you're saying there's no difference. So you see there's no difference between someone who was tahor and became tameh, he gets lashes if he drinks wine. So too, someone who was tameh the whole time should get lashes, right? No, this Mishnah, Resh Lakish said, is not talking about all the similarities and all the differences, but rather focusing on just a few of them, and it's saying that there is a difference in when they start counting. That is a difference, and so in what way are they the same? They're the same regarding shaving. Both of them have to shave on the 7th day, right? It doesn't matter if it was tahor and it became tameh. Certainly, that's part of the ritual. He has to shave his head on the 7th day and bring korbanot on the 8th day. And so too, someone who was tameh the whole time when he became a Nazir, he also has to shave on that day, on the 7th day. Now, this is actually open to question, and on the towards the end of today's daf, we're going to ask this very question. It's actually not clear that someone who was tameh when they started Nizirut has to shave on the 7th day of his purification. But right now, we're assuming that he does. And so the point is that that's the difference, right? That's why it says, en ben, there's no difference. No, his point is that here is one difference, and that implies there is a similarity, but I'm not telling you all the similarities. In fact, there could be more than one difference. Okay. Aval linyan malkut mai ze lokeh veze eno lokeh. So now for Rabbi Yochanan, we're going to challenge Rabbi Shakish further and say, wait a second. So there is a difference between them regarding when they start counting, but there's also a difference between them regarding lashes. That the one who was tameh the whole time does not get lashes. The one who was tahor becomes tameh does get lashes. If that is also a difference, litniyeh. So put that in, right? Why are you telling me that? This only mentioning one difference and one similarity. If there's more differences, put that in also. And the answer is betakante kamaire bekilkule la kamaire. Okay, we're listing the similarities and differences in one area regarding how to fix this Nazir when he wants to become tahor. Okay, during that process, at the end of this period, and when he wants to become tahor, there is a similarity in that they both have to shave on the 7th day, and there is a difference in that one can start counting on the 7th, one cannot start counting until the 8th. So it's focusing on that, not telling us all the differences, and it's not talking about the differences in terms of kilkul, of something that's detrimental, that if he had drunk wine during that time period, does he get lashes or not? That's a different topic of a problem that he has, and does he get a punishment for it or not? In fact, there is a difference there also, according to Resh Lakish, but this baraita is only talking about his purification process and what he has to do and when he can start counting. Good. Now the sixth and last challenge, Tashema. Mishaya tameh v'nazar. Asur legalech v'lishtot yayin. V'im gilech v'shata yayin. V'nitmalen metim. Hareze sofeg et ha'arba'im. Tiyuvta. This is going to be a final challenge. A braita that's also found in the Tosefta. So someone who was tameh while they became a Nazir is not allowed to shave or drink wine. If he did b'di'avad shave and drink wine or became tameh lamet, they do get lashes. So there you go. This is a conclusive proof that the halacha is like Rabbi Yochanan. Even though he was tameh at the time that he took upon himself a nazirut, the nazirut does apply, and it applies fully to the extent that he does get lashes, and Resh Lakish does not have an answer to this question. We now continue with a related question. Ba'ai Rava, Nazir vehu bebet hakevarot. Mahu, ba'ai shehiya lemalkot or la? For background, we're going to be comparing Nazir in the cemetery to another case of someone who is tahor, who enters the Bet HaMikdash area and becomes tameh accidentally while he is there. That halacha is that if he runs out immediately, he's all right. He only gets a punishment if he remains there, loiters in the Bet HaMikdash while he's tameh for the amount of time necessary to prostrate oneself. Right? How long does that take? To lie all the way down flat and get up, let's say it takes 30 seconds. Right? So if he leaves right away, he's all right. If he remains there 30 seconds, then he will receive a punishment. Now, that halacha we know. Rava is asking, what about a Nazir? A Nazir, if he's outside the cemetery, a tahor Nazir, the second he enters the cemetery, he becomes tameh, and he is liable all the consequences of a Nazir becoming tameh. That we know. But now the question is a parallel case. Someone who is not a Nazir, he enters a cemetery. He's in the cemetery, and he says, I had any Nazir. He takes upon himself to be a Nazir. That's why it's related to the discussion before. Here the question is, he will deserve Malkot. Is that only if he remains there for 30 seconds, then he deserves Malkot, similar to the person who became Tameh in the Bet HaMikdash? Or is this case different? And even after 1 second, just being a Nazir, being in the cemetery, he's already liable to Malkot immediately. So that's his question. Nazir, while he's in the Bet HaKevarot, does he need to remain there in order to receive lashes? Or even if he's there for less than 30 seconds, he also gets lashes. Okay, now we're going to clarify the question. Hechi dameh. Ilema damre le lo tinzor, lama li shehiya. Nazir mai tamala ba shehiya, te kamat ribe. Hachaname kamat ribe. If you're talking about a case where there are two other people there, witnesses, and they warn him, and they say, don't become a Nazir, then certainly he would not have to await the lingering period. Why? Because a Nazir himself, how come we don't require that a Nazirus Tahor who enters into a cemetery, we don't require him to be there for 30 seconds. Even for 1 second, he gets punished. Because people are there that are giving him a warning, and there are people giving him a warning, right? So if there's people that are giving him a warning, if he's there and people see him and they give him a warning, then it should be no time at all, right? I guess we're assuming that the people know him and he's like, hey, listen, I've been thinking about being a Nazir. They tell him, no, don't say you're a Nazir, you're in the cemetery. He goes and does it anyway. So that should require that should not require an amount of time for lingering. He should get lashes right away. Rather, Rava's question really would only apply if he entered into the cemetery inside a chest or a box or a cabinet, such that it's big enough that it does not, the person inside is protected from tum'ah, and then someone else, without knowledge of the guy inside who became a Nazir, see, so far the guy didn't do anything. He's inside this, let's call it today, he's in a truck. right? He's inside a truck, so he's protected, and the tumah does not enter into the truck because there is a barrier. And so while he's in the cemetery, he's in the truck, and so he's permitted. He can say, I'm going to be a Nazir. And then someone comes and opens, let's say there's a trap door in the truck on the floor, and he opens it up, and now there's no barrier, and the tumah enters. So he didn't do it himself on purpose. He didn't even have knowledge about it, so in that case, that's what we're talking about. And the two sides are ki gemirin shehiyah bebet hamikdash aval abarai la o dilma la shena tekum. When we learn the law of lingering, is that only in the Bet HaMikdash? In the Bet HaMikdash, when you're there already, you were tahor, and then by mistake you became tameh. Someone came and touched you, or whatever. So then you're only liable if you remain there for 30 seconds. But that's only a law in the Bet HaMikdash. Other laws outside it does not apply to. Or maybe, in fact, it would be the same thing, right? And because this is the scenario where it's not like the person was in the cemetery and they warned him and he did I'm a Nazir anyway, there for sure he would be liable immediately. But in this case, where happens to be in the cemetery, protected, he said a Nazir, he didn't do anything wrong yet, and then for some an accidental way he became tameh. So then also, do we say that's similar to the Bet HaMikdash, and he has 30 seconds, or is it different, and that leeway is only required in the Bet HaMikdash, is only given the Bet HaMikdash, but outside he would become tameh right away? Teko, we leave this question standing. All right, next question. Ba'ed Ashe. Nazar vehu bebet hakebarot ta'on giluach or lo. This is the question that I referred to earlier. If you have someone who became a Nazir while in the cemetery. All right, so we already saw that at least the prohibitions of Nazirut do apply to him. There was a question whether or not the punishments are applied to him as well. He's not going to start his counting, but he doesn't have to bring korbanot. Okay, so now he's tameh, he's in the cemetery, and after he leaves, he can become purified. He counts, right, 3 days, 7 days to purify himself, and on the 7th day, the question is, does he have to shave his head or not? A regular tameh met does not have to. He gets paraduma 3rd and 7th day. He goes to the mikveh on the 7th day. A regular tameh met is fine. But this guy, because he is a Nazir, and already, right, some of the prohibitions apply to him, so does he doesn't bring korbanot, we know that, so that would be a reason to say he doesn't shave, since if you don't bring korbanot, why would you have to shave your head, right? On the other hand, maybe he does, we don't know. Okay. The two sides are, who needs tiglachat? Someone who was tahor, and Nazir was tahor, and he became tameh because he is a full Nazir, and he ruined it by becoming tameh, so he has to shave, and he's going to bring korbanot also. But someone who was tameh the whole time, so his Nazirut does not fully kick in. How do you know it doesn't fully kick in? He doesn't bring korbanot either. He didn't ever started counting. So he doesn't have to shave. Or maybe for shaving, there's no difference, right? Maybe there's a difference only regarding korbanot, but shaving, he has to do both. In both cases, he has to shave. All right, that's our question. Let's see if we can answer it. Tashema. Misha Nazar vehu bebet hakebarot. Afilu haya sham 30 yom eno ole lo min haminyan ve'eno mebi korban tum'ah. From our Mishnah, once again, he became a Nazir while in the cemetery, and even if he stays there a long time, even 30 days, he never starts counting, not even day 1, and he does not have to bring the korbanot for a Nazir who became tameh. We infer korban tumahu de la mete aval giluche ba'eh. It says he doesn't have to bring korban, but it doesn't say anything about shaving. Therefore, we can assume that yes, he does have to shave on the 7th day. So that seems like a good proof, but we reject it, not necessarily. Ma ta'am ka'amar. Ma ta'ameno mebi korban tuma mishum de la ba'e galuche. In other words, they come together, right? Why would he not have to bring a korban tuma? Because he doesn't have to shave. And so you can tell one from the other. Although the Mishnah didn't mention it specifically, it doesn't have to mention everything, right? These two things imply each other, and so maybe in fact he doesn't have to bring korban means because he doesn't shave. All right, so no proof from there. Now, second attempt. Tashema. En ben tameh shenazar lenazir tahor shenitma, ela tameh shenazar shvi'i shelo ole lo min haminyan, venazir tahor shenitma en shvi'i shelo ole lo min haminyan. This is already the third time we're seeing this braita. It's good. We're getting a lot of mileage out of it. There's no difference between someone tameh who declared himself to be a Nazir to someone tahor who was a Nazir already and became tameh, except that the one who was tameh when he became a Nazir, he can start counting as soon as he becomes tahor on the 7th day, whereas someone who was tahor and became tameh, he cannot start counting on the 7th day because he has to bring korbanot on the 8th day, so he can only start counting on the 8th day. Now, we infer, my love, shavin. Said the only difference between them is regarding when they can start counting. But it doesn't say, and also there's another difference that one of them shaves and another one doesn't shave. So therefore, we can deduce that both of them have to shave. Certainly the one who was tahor and became tameh, he shaves on the 7th day, brings to korbanot in the 8th day. So since it doesn't list it as a difference, also someone who was tameh, he became a Nazir in the cemetery, would also have to shave on the 7th day. Is that a good proof? La halmakot ze ha lemalkot ze vaze shavin. No, when it's saying that this is the only difference, that's not to include every single difference. It just wants to contrast the starting to count with another way in which they are the same, in that they both get lashes. In fact, both cases, someone who was tameh or someone who was tahor, someone says, I'm a Nazir in the cemetery, and therefore he is tameh, would also get lashes. So yeah, that's a way in which the same. So it's contrasting this similarity with this difference of, do they start counting the new one on the 7th day or 8th day? But this was not talking about shaving at all. So then we follow up on that about the tiglach hadmai ze megalech veze eno megalech. So what you're trying to tell me is that there is a difference, and one shaves and one does not shave. The one who was tahor and became tameh shaves. The one who was tameh the whole time does not shave. Litniyed. So include it. If you just said en ben, there's no difference between them, except, so give two exceptions. Talk about them both if in fact that is a difference. And the fact that it doesn't say that means that they must be the same. And the answer is Tana Shiviri Shelo Vechol Mileh. Indeed, they are different, and the difference regarding shaving is already included in the difference that it talks about. This baraita is talking about what happens on the 7th and all the related consequences of what happens on the 7th. So therefore, the baraita only needs to say that one counts and one doesn't count on the 7th day. And you can figure out from there that the one who does not start counting on the 7th day, why not? Because he has to bring a korban on the 8th day. Along with the korban on the 8th day, also comes shaving on the 7th day. This one package deal. So shaving on the 7th day, bring korban on the 8th day, therefore you can only start counting on the 8th day. Whereas the one who was tameh the entire time, he can start counting on the 7th day. Why? Because he doesn't bring a korban on the 8th day. If he doesn't bring a korban, he also does not shave on the 7th day. So that's why it doesn't have to mention specifically that there is a difference between them regarding shaving, because that's already included. We're talking about the difference of the 7th, counting the 7th, and all the related matters that will go along with the package of whether you count on the 7th or not. All right, so there is again no proof, and now we're going to see one more proof. This is on this stuff is going to be a long one from the following baraita. Tashema en li ela yeme tum'ato shen olin lo min haminyan yeme chiluto minayin. Okay, we're now comparing the time period when a Nazir is tameh lamet to a time period when a Nazir is tahor lamet, but tameh as a mesorah. And there is, even though they're both tameh, and those days do not count towards up to whatever. If he's 30 days, they don't count towards the 30. So enli elimet tum'ato. So we know that when he's tameh, those days that while he's tameh lamet do not count towards his towards the tally. In fact, they actually cancel out everything that came before. All right, so we know that's true for tameh met. But what about chiluto? Means when he is confirmed to be a mesorah. maybe we should count them. How do you know that you don't count those days? In fact, the halacha is that they pause, right? If he's 15 days good and becomes a mesorah, those times of mesorah, let's say mesorah for, the purification process and all that for 10 days, just pause, and then he goes back and he continues counting 16. But how do you know you don't count those days themselves as part of Nazir? Because he is still a Nazir. So v'dinhu, it's a kavachomer. Ma yemei tumato megalech umebi korban, af yemei chiluto megalech umebi korban. Uma yemei tumato en olin lo min haminyan, af yemei chiluto en olin lo min haminyan. More of a comparison than a kavachomer, but the point is that they are similar. Just like when someone is tameh lamet, a Nazir becomes tameh lamet, he has to shave and bring korbanot, and it's the same thing regarding a mesorah. He at the end of when he becomes tahor, he also has to shave. All mesoraim have to shave and bring korbanot. So look how similar they are. Therefore, they should be the same here also. Just like when someone is tameh lamet, those days do not count towards his Nazir tally. So too, mesorah, those days do not count towards his mesorah tally, right? Because they're the same in so many ways. All right, that's a proof that's an answer. That's a proof. But then the Baraita continues and rejects that. Lo im amarta b'metumato shekemebatel bahen et hakodmin lefichach en olin lo min haminyan. No, you can't compare them because when a Nazir is tameh lamet, not only don't you count those days when he's tameh met, it also cancels any days that he was a Nazir beforehand. So maybe they go together. The reason why you don't count those days as positives is because it actually cancels all the days before it. So he's down to 0. So that we cannot compare that to a mesorah, where when someone becomes a Nazir, becomes a mesorah, you don't cancel the days that he already did, that already was a Nazir. Those 15 days are good. They stand. You put them away in storage until he's ready to count again. And therefore, since you don't cancel, it's not the same as tumat met, and maybe you should count, even though he's tameh mesorah. So what? Continue counting as Nazir. Not the same. Baraita then saves itself and says, no, we can bring a proof from here. Amarta. ומה נזיר בקבר ששערו ראוי לתגלחת אין עולין לו מן המניין ימי חילוטו שאין ראוי לתגלחת לא כל שכן שאין עולין לו מן המניין. Oh, look at this. A Nazir, Bakevet, just means that he's not in the grave. He's in the cemetery. While a Nazir is in the cemetery, and his hair is growing during that time, so even though we're not counting those days towards his Nazirut tally, still that hair that grows will count towards a 30-day hair growth, right? We saw before that a Nazir cannot purify himself unless he has enough hair to shave, which is 30 days. So even if his days finish, but his hair didn't grow yet, he's going to have to wait till his hair grows. So this Nazir in the kever, that hair that grows during that time can be used as days of hair growth, even though those days do not count towards his Nizirut tally. So too, that someone who's a Mesorah, whose hair growth will not help him as a Nazir, because a Mesorah has to shave his head at the end of the Nizirut. So therefore, that hair that grows while he's a Mesorah is not going to help him towards hair growth for a Nazir. So all the more so that those days will not count towards his Nizirut. In other words, so we're gonna, and this is a kal vachomer that Nazir. Right. Don't say that Mesorah is better than a Tameh Lamet. Tameh Lamet cancels everything before. That's true. That's the more severe. So maybe that's why we don't count his days, whereas Mesorah does not cancel the days before. But now we're saying, no, we're going to turn it around and say there's a way in which a Mesorah is actually more stringent. He's worse off than someone who's Tameh Lamet. Someone who's Tameh Lamet, Nazir who's Tameh Lamet, that hair growth at least counts for him. And yet, you don't count those days for Nazir, so therefore, Mesorah, whose hair growth, while he's a Mesorah, will not help him to shave as a Nazir, all the more so, you shouldn't count his days as a Mesorah towards his Nazir tally. So you see, we do have, that's the proof. Okay, now that's the end of the Braita. Here's our proof regarding shaving. My love tiglachat tum'ah. Oh, what kind of case are we talking about? Are we not talking about a case of someone who became a Nazir in the cemetery, and so he was tameh the whole time? And when in this kavachomer here, when it says, look, that hair growth counts towards the necessary hair growth, are we not talking about the shaving that he will have to do as a tumat met in order to become tahor, right? Isn't that what we're talking about? And therefore, you see, there is a shaving, so that this person who, he has, let's say he was already, he already had hair growth, but only 25 days worth of hair growth before he went in the cemetery and became a Nazir, and so he needs 5 more days of hair growth in order to be able to shave. And so those 7 days that he's waiting to become tahor, after he leaves the cemetery, of course, because you can't become tahor while you're in the cemetery, so those 7 days of extra hair growth will count towards the hair growth needed to shave at the end of the tum'at met period. That shows that someone who was a Nazir, who was always a Nazir, he became a Nazir while tameh, does shave, right? And we answer, no, la letiglachat tahora. No, in this Kavachomer, we're talking about the shaving that one does at the end of the Nazirut period altogether. So that if someone started off made himself a Nazir in the cemetery, okay, this is a problem, and he's not going to start counting until after he's out. Nevertheless, the point of the hair growth is that any hair that grew while he was waiting to become tahor on that beginning, those first few days, will count as hair growth later when he finishes his Nazirut and has to shave his head. That's what it counts for, but in fact, he does not shave at the end of the initial 7 days of becoming tahor for tum'at met. And so there is, in fact, no proof from this baraita. And now we say, in fact, that this answer, tiglachat tahara, not only is it a possible reading of the baraita, it's even a better reading. Hachinami mistabera. It makes sense to read it this way. Why? Disa kadatech tiglachat tum'ah yemeh chiluto mila ba'e tiglachat. Because if you say that the Kavachomer in the Baraita is talking about the hair that grows during the 7 days of purification before he does have to cut his hair at the end of being purified from Tumat Met, and that's what the Baraita calls growth, which can be counted towards that cutting at the end of 7 days when it becomes tahor, well then it would not be a good parallel to Yemei Chilutot, his Mesorah days. The Mesorah certainly has to cut his hair, shave his head at the end of his purification process of being a Mesorah. And why would you say that hair growth does not count, right? It would count. That does count towards his Nazirut. And so that actually, that would count towards his Mesorah hair growth, towards his hair growth needed to cut as a Mesorah. So both of them would then be the same. Both of them have to grow hair so that they can cut it on the 7th day of the end of their purification process. And there would be no difference between them. So the fact that the Baraita says there is a difference between them, that one can be counted and one cannot be counted, that shows we're not talking about the counting over here for the tum'ah, but rather for tahara. And so this is a good reading. That which grows while a mesorah cannot be counted towards Nezirut, where the final Nezirut, because it's going to be cut, whereas that which grows during his purification process can count at the end of his Nezirut, because he's not going to cut it at the end of 7 days. So you see that this is really a good reading and a necessary reading. And therefore, this baraita would actually be a proof for the side that says that Nazir, someone who becomes Nazir in the cemetery, does not shave at the end of his 7 days of Tum'at Met. And so that actually would be a proof for that way. And we end up saying, no, it's not a proof in either direction, because you can read it also the other way, as follows. La tiglachat nizirut katane. When it says that the growth of hair for a tumat mesorah does not count, certainly it does count for his sara'at that he's going to tum'ah that he's going to have to shave. The point is simply that it will not count at all towards his nizirut. No nizirut, not one near soon and not one at the end. Whereas someone who was tameh met when he became a nazir, let's say he does shave at the end of 7 days, you could still make a contrast between them, because that hair growth will help him towards his nizirut status, in that he'll shave it at the end of the 7 days, so that he can start counting Nazirut, and then he'll have to have another 30 days of hair growth before the end. So in fact, they are in a sense parallel, that they both have to shave at the end of 7 days. And when the Baraita says that the Mesorah's hair growth does not count, it just means that it doesn't count towards help him in any Nizirut way, but rather only as a Mesorah. And therefore this Baraita is ambiguous, and so far we do not have proof yet, and tomorrow we'll continue with more suggested proofs about whether someone who made himself a Nazir in the cemetery, and kind of not sure if he really started Nazirut, but not fully. He doesn't bring korbanot at the end of 7 days, but does he shave or not? Stay tuned for the answer.